It's interesting that you asked the question this way, because it implies that the pandemic is this catalyst event that causes change. While sitting here 3 years, actually almost literally 3 years since it started in March 2020, and really having this benefit and the blessing of a hindsight, one could think that the pandemic is just one of the events in life that shapes us. It's longer, it's more unusual, it's definitely unprecedented, and the one that we haven't been truly trained to react to. But it is one of the events that shapes who we are. At least it shapes who I am, and I believe that shapes the organization. So I wouldn't want to believe that my leadership evolves only because of the pandemic event. It's simply the leadership that evolves because as everything, it changes, it matures. If I think of the company and how we have changed as a company, I would think that one is the change on a very sort of technical side of things, which is the change of the way we do business. And that is very similar between us and everyone else. Even this interview, normally you would have called me maybe, or we would have met somewhere. And now you didn't even offer me to meet you, right? It was so natural to do it over Teams. And we all felt comfortable with just setting it up the way we have done it. But those are very, very technical, I would think, changes in the way we conduct the business or we conduct ourselves. I think what is far deeper, and that has been born out of the dramatic effect the pandemic had on how we all felt in those early days of lockdowns, and this loneliness that the pandemic has caused in all of us, and detachment from work colleagues. It was so unnatural and so sudden. It gave us permission to ask questions to one another that were far more personal than they normally would have been. And they were far more equalizing than they normally would have been between different levels of the organization. So if I think of how we changed in terms of this intangible exchange of information and exchange of emotions between one another in the working environment, and possibly not only in the working environment, it comes from simply knowing more about each other and having this curiosity and also permission to ask those questions that might have been unheard of before the pandemic took place.
I mean, it's an excellent point, Joanna. And I would say to some people who haven't been around as long as I have, when you look at just our own lives, 56 years in my case, that some of these historical things in the 3 years are really not that huge in some ways. In other ways, they might be. But for instance, we're having a big conversation now about the corporation tax increases, which are coming down the line. But you look at corporation tax in the 70s, it was over 50%. So everyone panics now. But to your point, it's an excellent one. I mean, as for pandemic we went through the last 3 years, at some point we started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the right expression. And as I said, we've had excellent Q2s and Q3s across the board, and even full year 2022 is very good. Did leadership change as we started coming out of this period in a way that you conduct your teams and you look at new business opportunities and shape the group to get the growth that your shareholders and the C-suite demands and wants?
What did change is a phase of a crisis, right? Every crisis management book will talk about the phases of crisis management. And if we were to roll back the clock to March 2020, and then maybe summer 2020, so the first green shoots, and winter 2020, 2021, which was a big disappointment because it suddenly felt like it's all going back, and then summer 2021, and all those moments of time, we could have written a book about those phases of the pandemic and somehow how our leadership is changing, how we have been changing as leaders in the way we talk to our teams and the way we focused our teams and the way we focused our own attention and our own efforts, depending on where we were in the cycle. It's interesting that you make a reference to 2022 that you called a good year, and indeed IHG also published the results and we talked about the year that exceeded our expectations. this is simply it. This is the new reality. Trying to look back and somehow imagining, in my view, that we can simply take those 3 years, put them on a shelf, and forget about them, and come back to 2019 is not a strategy that I would adopt on so many levels, be it in business, but being it also far more broadly applying it to a travel industry or applying it simply to life. Because there are things that have changed in us over those 3 years, not because of the direct impact of the pandemic, but because we simply started looking at certain aspects of life differently. We started, at least me personally, but I think also we see it in consumer trends, a lot has been taken away from us. And one was to talk about the freedom that has been taken away from us, the freedom of travel, the freedom of seeing one another, the freedom of seeing your family, the freedom of doing what we wanted. All that was talked about in the moment when it was happening. That was very dramatic and it was very sudden. But in hindsight, again, what it did teach us is that it can be taken away. And because it can be taken away, there is a certain recognition in us of saying, okay, so I don't want this to happen anymore. I don't want to have the external event that takes it away from me. So the moment I can use life to the best possible extent, I will prioritize life, and I will not wait, or I will not put something forward just because historically I might have waited 5 years for my dream vacation. I won't do it anymore. I will just do it this year because God knows what's going to happen in 5 years. And that desire to catch life sooner, somehow paired with also the generational shift of the generation, I think, whatever we call them now, the Generation X, the next generation that lives life faster and lives in a faster environment, the environment that exchanges information so much faster than maybe that you talked about the 70s or the generations in the 70s. All of it makes the travel industry so filled with demand that we keep seeing.
Certainly, airlift's extremely expensive. Probably people are shifting their segments that they book for holidays. They might be taking 2 weekend trips plus a holiday a year rather than 3 or 4. Maybe the other way around. Maybe they're doing more. It's certainly changed things. I mean, in a vacuum, is it a danger to focus too much on the last 3 years in terms of what the future you want the future to be for IHG or any in the hotel industry? Is there do leaders need to look at an even bigger picture?
If you ask me as a leader, I think that my responsibility is, and I actually do it every week. I have a discipline of doing it every week on Friday afternoons, of looking at what have I learned over the week from pure leadership perspective. So what were the events of the week and what I shall retain from this week? And I write it down. And the pandemic is a source of learnings that was beyond what we normally might be learning. But it was also quite restricted to a certain behavior and the reaction to a certain event. And it's priceless. It's definitely an experience that's worth having, as painful and hurtful and one of those that we don't really want to remember about, but it is an experience that is strengthening my leadership. And I believe it's strengthening the leadership of so many other people. But there is a lot that is not pandemic related that is going on in parallel, and it just happens to coincide. So for me, a good leader is one that can lift a view above what is here and now and what is the most talked topic on the first page of the newspaper, and be able to balance the reaction for where he or she is needed, because this is what the team asks for and the team needs, and then this ability to lift, stay there and think of how am I going to then impact the future from where we are starting.
The generation that came into a hotel industry in March 2020, I certainly don't want to tar them all with the same brush. We hear things such as their ability to interact might be suffered a little bit because of this. Do you see that, or are people is it all to do with the culture of a company and the recruitment process for people coming in are just as able to pivot and change and be flexible as people who might be in the industry for years?
I think you're asking far deeper question. You are asking the question about the social impact of the pandemic on those who entered the adult life around 2020. And I only can judge it by experience from my own siblings and from colleagues who I am meeting. Clearly, there is a social impact on all of us because those social bonds have been sort of torn for all of us. It must have been particularly difficult if you didn't have the social network before. I can only be empathetic about imagining entering a workforce in the world where you didn't start from the personal relationship, then you then bring to a screen, and then you mix a screen and a personal relationship. But if you start only on a screen, how unusual and unhuman this experience must have been for this whole generation, not only in our industry, but in all other industries. So understandably, getting into the working space and finding one's adult place in a society was very different for this generation that it might have been for me or for others. What I do see in the industry, and yes, I do think that there is a lot that IHG can be proud of, and I am proud of leading the team here in the UK, is the way you do it. And it is all around having the sufficient level of empathy, compassion, care, and interest in the other to shape the teams and to shape the culture of the team in such a way that embraces the situation that this particular generation had found itself in.
I think it's an excellent point. I hear that the industry perhaps is more human today, even though we're a people industry. Go back to my generation growing up, if you had any, I mean, the word mental health weren't even talked about. If you had a problem, you just, tighten your belt or pull your socks up, etc., etc. So those things, the fact that we're in a culture, we're able to talk about that more and help people, it is a good thing for leading companies and for growth for companies, surely.
Agree, and again, I think it's broader than hospitality. We are very much people-oriented industry, so clearly, by mere nature of the industry, there is more conversations that happen in the hotels or that happen in the hotel company that there might be in a different business. I think that what we are seeing, and that is somehow a new reality. It's a new era in the social or societal development. Is an ability to find the words and to use the language to talk about oneself. And be it a mental health issue, be it a regular health issue, be it anything, what an individual wants to express or wants to share with the others, we are just far more, first we have tools to share it far more easy, but also we have this interest in having those conversations with one another. And even the expressions that you have mentioned, it's interesting that the language carries expressions that sort of in the pure linguistical aspect of them, those expressions are not very compassionate. They put a lot of responsibility on an individual, and they rather put pressure on an individual. They do not talk about the group, the society, the company, the friendship group, or the family, helping someone to work through the issues that one might be experiencing.
To a change to a good. Now, how have you seen the last few years shape your own region, the UK, in terms of relationships with owners, portfolio increases? I mean, you're adding a lot of product in the UK and Ireland.
It's a topic for another conversation. How am I going to answer in sort of a bite-sized conversation? There's a few things worth noting. One is for all of us, including, of course, our partnerships with the owners here in the UK and Ireland, an experience like this creates a bond that's unique. It will be a subject of stories. It will be a subject of us sitting around the fireplace and reminiscing about how it was. But it also creates a bond of trust and a bond of shared history or shared memory that is adding a layer of to the relationship that might have been more business focused before this event. Secondly, thank you for recognizing that we are indeed adding product, in our case, brands, to the estate. It has been for us the time. You asked me about the leadership over those 3 years' time. While we were dealing with a crisis, this also has been the time of strengthening our portfolio of brands. And you have seen it with the 100 Voco that has been signed or open globally, with the Vignette brand being launched during the pandemic, and the first Vignette being announced and opened in Europe, and the first one very, very soon, hopefully coming into the UK market. So there has been a lot going on top or beside dealing with the pandemic effects. And thirdly, again, you referenced it, the performance of 2022 surprised all of us, surprised also our owners in a positive way. But let's stay grounded, and that's possibly where sort of my message is to my team and my leadership style in the beginning of this 2020-23. Let's stay grounded in the reality that is still a reality that is not easy. All the pressures that we all know about that put pressure on our owners and the return of their business, they are still around. None of it has eased. And possibly those pressures are actually more difficult to resolve than the pandemic event that was out of our control and that was, by nature of it, due to finish at a certain point, albeit we didn't know when. The inflationary pressure, the interest rate pressure, the energy prices pressure, all this is a material challenge, and it puts material strain on our owners. And it is our responsibility to stay grounded in this reality rather than only focusing on the demand returning. That is, of course, making us all feel more hopeful about the future.
That's an excellent way of answering that question I gave you, which is huge. I understand. And I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? But the pandemic was obviously, in some ways, a very personal problem, although hopefully, you know, your families weren't affected, you weren't affected, etc. But the problems we're having now of energy inflation and costs, and I mean, it's almost even closer, isn't it, to people? And we've jumped from a fire to a frying pan, or the other way around. What the expression is, in some ways, with these two back-to-back, problems, and obviously the geopolitical mess in some parts of the world, etc. So, you know, maybe lastly, just my last question, but I did send. I mean, we're very interested in knowing if a pandemic was to start tomorrow, what would you tell yourself if you had for 3 years of experience of going through a pandemic? What would you say to yourself and your teams?
Before I answer you, the clarifying point of this one, you mean another pandemic, or you want me to imagine 2020?
Yes, imagine 2020. We never had a pandemic, but okay, you experienced it. Does that make sense? What would you tell yourself now?
I would tell myself, maintain calm and composure. It is knowing what I know now and remembering what we knew in March 2020, it is going to be far longer than anyone could have imagined at that point. So staying calm and composed in approaching how the months are going to unveil will be necessary, because it's a long journey ahead.